right. Are y'all ready? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our September Motherhouse Earth afternoon. I'm going to read a brief reflection from the elders of the Hopi Nation from the year 2000. I'm sure you have all heard this, but it seemed very appropriate as our neighbors are here with us today. To my fellow swimmers, here is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid, who will try to hold on to the shore. They are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, and keep our heads above water. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration, for we are the ones we have been waiting for. Amen. I am so excited to introduce to you Carolyn Cromer and Susan Gatz, just down the road from us from the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth. I met Carolyn shortly after I moved here when she became the Director of Ecological Sustainability for the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth. She welcomed Susan Clausen and I to the property and showed us around and talked to us about her position. And I've been hearing a lot about what the charities have been doing for the last few years. Earlier this year, I was on the planning committee for the Sisters of Earth conference, and our theme was shaping the wisdom, sharing the dream, creating the future we want. And when we were talking on our planning committee about who is creating the future that we want, I immediately thought of the Charities of Nazareth and some of the great work that they've been doing, and invited Susan and Carolyn to come to Cincinnati to speak to the Sisters of Earth. And they did, and it was a huge hit. And so when I came back and was telling people here about their presentation, every single person I talked to said, can you get them to come here and do the same thing? And I said, I don't know, let me try. So it is really exciting to me that we have the opportunity to work so closely together with our neighbors on so many different projects. And without further ado, I would like to give you Carolyn Cromer and Susan Gatz.
Well, for me, Loretto is like a second home. I have been coming to Loretto ever since I was a young sister and making retreats, especially working with Elaine. And it just, and Mary Swain is like a part of the SEN family. And Elaine, I didn't see you sitting there till just now. So it's a delight for us to be here and to share with you what we're doing and to hear what you're doing, because together we are shaping the future and the future that we want. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly share with you the kind of backstory about the sisters and our sisters and how we got to where we are now. So in 1995, we did our first like official mission statement. And in that mission statement, right at the the very bottom of that second paragraph, you see, and to care for the earth. It was just a little phrase. And in a sense, those of us who really believed that need to be in our mission statement almost had to fight for it to be there, but it was. And after that, the community sort of picked up and began to really think, what does that mean? What do we need to know? How do we care for the earth? Then we began to look at the new cosmology. We began to study earth spirituality, and all of those things were ideas that were beginning to grow and develop. And so our sisters around the world, we're an international congregation. And so our sisters around the world, our sisters in India and Belize and in the United States, began to look at, well, and kind of unpack that phrase a little bit and try to see what does it mean. We studied ecofeminist spirituality, which also was beginning to grow up at that time. So that in 2000, at our next assembly, we were able to expand on that one little phrase because we had, over those 5 years, really been educating ourselves and trying to see what does it mean. So this was the statement that we approved in 2000. And you see in that now we're starting to talk about all of creation. We're talking about the interconnectedness of all that is our responsibility. You see sustainable relationship in that. And then we pledged ourselves to scrutinize carefully our own lifestyle, our environmental practices and policies in each culture in which we live, to deepen our understanding of the mysteries of the universe, and to be aware of Earth's gifts, especially the land entrusted to us. And you'll see that kind of come back again. And that we would collaborate with others and work with them for advocacy and policy intervention. So once we had kind of pledged ourselves to these more specific things, some of the things that began to show up in the community were solar panels. These solar panels are on the roof of our hospital in Mokama, India. And pretty much all of the hospital is run off of solar energy at this point. We also put solar panels on our roof at Nazareth, on our Ecological hall. We launched into and sort of did a pilot of what it meant to do a conservation easement. We knew the concept, but we had never had any experience with it. So we had about 78 acres up in Pennsylvania, Dunbar, Pennsylvania, that we no longer needed and felt that we wanted to sell. But before we did that, we worked with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to see about putting a conservation easement on that property so that when we sold it, the people who bought it had to agree to live by the principles that we had outlined in that easement. Things like they wouldn't do logging, they wouldn't do fracking, they wouldn't extract minerals. There were a number of things that we said that we wanted to do for the sake of preserving that as more natural land. And we did. We sold it to somebody who was very excited about being part of that and are working now with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to continue to develop that land and to see how they can preserve it in a more natural way. Another thing that we did, because we're an international congregation, we do have to travel and we do have to fly. And so we started the practice of doing carbon offsets for the international travel that we were doing. And so we would figure out how many of us were flying, where were we going, and how much carbon footprint did that equal. And then we would work with different groups to do something to offset that. Sometimes it was planting trees on our own property. Sometimes it was working with other groups who were doing things around the nature to preserve nature. So that was our effort to try to offset what we had to do in order to be together as a congregation. We do recycling programs. I'm sure you all do as well. And since Carolyn came on board, that recycling program has really stepped up. And we've been working even more with the Bardstown community to see how that could increase and how we can work together. We've done solar hot water in India. This is on one of the, trying to see where that is. I think that's on the Provincial House in India. We've done composting, both at Nazareth and in India. I think this is a funny story. We have an international sustainability committee, and so we were talking about composting with Sister Suma, and she was talking about, well, you know, we're trying to do recycling and that sort of thing, and composting. And the problem that we have is they've got a big compound there, and at night they have watchdogs. And she said, the watchdogs keep going into the composting and dragging the stuff out. And so every morning I have to go around and like gather it back again. So different countries have different issues with regard to doing, trying to do things like recycling and composting. In India, they use biogas. They take the slurry from the food and the cows and things like that, and use that methane gas for cooking. So those were some of the things that after that 2000 assembly chose to affirm that statement, we began to see ourselves really looking at our lifestyle and trying to see how we could do. In 2014, and we also, most of the schools there have a sign like this, and they really are very intent on trying to help the students to think about being plastic free and what does it mean to have a green and clean campus. So we have a number of schools in India still. So in 2014, after the 2013 assembly, we did a process and worked with the total congregation to look at what would be guiding principles and values for decision making around our land and buildings, because we knew looking at the future that those would be decisions that we would have to make. And so what would guide us as we were doing that? So we developed this Earth statement. And again, you see the interconnectedness, reverence for the sacredness, and the kind of principles that we would want to take into consideration, that the land is a gift from God entrusted to our care and is a resource for mission, that we would continue to educate ourselves and others about the environment and the new cosmology. Decisions regarding land and buildings will include eco-friendly consciousness and futuristic vision, discernment across the congregation as appropriate, consultation with experts and others who have experience in making such decisions, consideration of the impact of the decision on those who are poor and marginalized, especially women, willingness to creatively repurpose or relinquish for the sake of mission, and that we would collaborate with others. So at this past General Assembly in May, we did decide that we are going to now have a committee that will begin to look at what shall be the future of Nazareth. And these would be the guiding principles and values that that committee would begin to work with. We're also a part of the Sustainable Lands Roundtable, which you all are also a part of. Anthony Mary comes to that. And Liz, do you still come to that? Liz comes to that. So that's been hugely helpful in terms of collaboration with others as we look together in this region of what is it that our lands, the lands that the religious congregations hold in trust, how shall we use those for mission and for the sake of the whole? So as we look at Nazareth, for example, we're going to be looking at what does this area need for Nazareth to be, and take that as a part of our discernment. Then as we looked a couple of years ago at down the road, we realized that if we were going to take our efforts at sustainability to a next level, that we had to have someone in the organization whose responsibility and charge that was. Sister Teresa Knabel and I had been working on sustainability issues. But as we looked at the fact that I would be moving out of the presidency and Teresa was working with me in that we really needed a director of ecological sustainability if we were going to go to a next level in care for the earth. And so we did a lot of research. We talked to a lot of people who had directors of sustainability, got ideas. What would that person be responsible for? How would they function? What were their recommendations and suggestions? We created a job description, and then God sent us Carolyn Cromer. God is so good. She is so good. And so we feel really blessed that Carolyn was available at that time. Because we're an international congregation, we really wanted someone who had international experience. And so Carolyn had worked in the Peace Corps for 2 years in Morocco. And so, how many? 3.5 years in Morocco. And so had lived in a developing country. So we were just delighted that she had so much experience, and the kind of experience that we felt like would be extremely helpful as we moved into this. And so I think a couple of things. We looked at if we really took this seriously. In our mission statement, we say that we will risk our lives and our resources in carrying out the mission. And this was a chance for us to risk our resources as we hired somebody into this. We were putting some funding toward living out what we said we wanted to do, and knew that we needed someone who could help us, who had the skills and the experience and the background to help us go even farther than we had gone. So I introduce to you Carolyn Cromer, God sent to us.
Thank you all so much for having us. This is a real treat. And I look forward to the exchange of ideas after we're finished with our presentation, because we are all learning from each other as we go through this. And I don't know have you all distributed the Season of Creation video yet? Oh, okay. You all partnered with us on a video for the Season of Creation on what you all are doing with sustainability. And I hope that you all get something out of that and feel like we are all walking together. We did that with the Dominicans and also the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. So we're all supporting each other. Well, I started life as a legislative aide, actually. So working in local politics in Louisville. I'm from Louisville. And then I decided I really felt called to do something with the environment. So I went to graduate school and got master's in ecology and also in forestry, and then spent a number of years managing nature preserves in Kentucky and in California. And then the recession hit. and the funding was cut out of conservation everywhere. So I came back and did some work for Metro Parks in Louisville on multi-use paths. I did work with the Girl Scouts, helping to start a STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and math, and just a number of other things. But really my love is in natural areas. And well, actually, one of the things I was doing right before I started this job was working with an energy consultant on helping people tighten up their houses, become more energy efficient. And that has helped a lot as I work with our buildings and maintenance people on, HVAC systems, which is not one of my strengths. So sure, thank you. So in starting a new position, a new office, and in supporting what has been an ongoing effort, one of the things that I did when I started was, and one of the things that's ongoing, is looking at the environmental landscape. What is the best role for the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth to be playing? We can participate in efforts of sustainability in a lot of ways. And so trying to figure that out has been part of what we are continuing to do. And one of the big things and more immediate things that I encouraged, and the executive committee for the community picked up and really has done a great job of supporting it, is addressing climate change. Climate change for all of us. And one of the big things and more immediate things that I encouraged, and the executive committee for the community picked up and really has done a great job of supporting it, is addressing climate change. Climate change for all of us is really the overarching issue that is affecting the entire planet. I don't have to tell you all that, but I heard a really good talk recently about how do you talk to people about climate change when they ask, where does it fit in your priority list? And she said, it's not on my priority list, because everything on my priority list, my family, my faith, my job, my neighborhood, my food system, everything is affected by climate change and what's happening. So that is true. And when looking at what role can the charities of Nazareth play, one thing that we can do is be a model. And you all know what a model you are for the people whom you touch. And people look to you all just like they do the SCNs. So the executive committee approved a commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to 0. And we gave ourselves 20 years in the United States and Belize, and 30 years in India and Botswana and Nepal, which is all the countries where the community is. Truthfully, I think India and Nepal will get there first. They are, a lot of it is a culture. It's lifestyle change. And they already are doing that in a way that is more challenging to do here in the United States, simply because of how our society is set up. This goal is right in line with what is recommended by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who is the scientific body. They're kind of like the global experts on climate change, and they help to inform the Paris Agreement and the science behind the Paris Agreement. It's also right in line with what the Paris Agreement is trying to do to not go above 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by 2100. You hear 2 degrees Celsius talked about as well with the Paris Agreement. They set 2 goals, which I don't understand. I'm sure there's a lot of political background to that. But when you look at the difference in how the poor of the world, especially women, will be affected by even a 0.5 degrees Celsius difference in warming, it's significant. And in order to fit in line with the rest of our mission, trying to do what we could to help bring the world to that 1.5 degrees Celsius cap felt right to us. So that's how we got there. Susan talked about how we've already been committed to renewable energy. We're trying to continue that as we look at how to meet that goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Something else that we're trying to do together is to protect and restore our native habitat. Unfortunately, we don't have the acreage that you all have, but we do have some woodlands. And so one of the things that I've been doing is representing the SCNs in conversations about the Salt River Basin, the Salt River watershed. And we have a small piece in that, but it's an important piece. And when you look at an aerial map of where our campus fits in that larger picture, it becomes very obvious to me anyway, that those woodlands, as much as we can do to nurture and to extend our woodlands, would help to create wildlife corridors that can reach all the way to Bernheim Forest, which would be fabulous. When you start to talk about thousands of acres of habitat, then you're talking about supporting your megafauna or your bears and coyotes and some of those species that we call keystone species because they have such a profound effect on all of the species that are in the food chain beneath them, including plants. We've dipped a big toe into an effort to invite some native plants into our landscaping on campus. This is one of those what have we learned sort of things where I think we learned a lot from our initial attempts. I had a conversation just today with our grounds director and our buildings director, or excuse me, campus service director, on how we don't need to think just in terms of a pollinator garden that's all natives, that we can have a landscape bed that has native plants that are incorporated into it. Any bed on campus can. And it's really changing what your eye is used to seeing and what we consider beautiful, and also supporting those the guidelines that Susan mentioned about how we manage our land and what effect it will have on the other species that live on that campus. And that can be a tough sell sometimes when people are expecting things to look a certain way the moment they're put in the ground. It can be more challenging. Our Western Province Car Committee has really embraced electric vehicles. This was something else where technology is helping us reach that goal of reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. And when I looked at what was available on the market right now, I realized there's really no reason why we can't be, from this point on, buying either electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids, with very few exceptions, like a lawnmower or a truck. Right now, they don't have any electric trucks that I'm aware of. Actually, they do. They do, but they're a little bit harder to find. So the sisters purchased their first electric vehicle earlier this summer, and this is Sister Molly who's driving it. And I asked her just last week if she still liked it, and she said she loves it. And in fact, other sisters have come up to her and talked about how much they like it. And she said, I'm a little afraid they're going to take the car away from me because so many people want to drive it. So we're about to purchase more electric vehicles to be part of our fleet. And it's just all part of that inching those emissions down. We are starting to put in chargers on our campus, not just for our cars, but also for visitors. We're starting to do that on our Louisville campus as well. So this is coming fast. We will start to see electric vehicles very soon on the road. Our campus service director, on his own initiative, found an electric lawnmower that runs on a rechargeable battery. And so there were a couple of these approved for this next year's budget, and we're going to try them out. I think they have about a 7-hour battery life, depending on what you're mowing and the temperature. The recycling committee on campus at Nazareth made a commitment. The recycling committee made a commitment to be a zero waste campus. Part of this helps to support the greenhouse gas emission goal, but part of it is just other resource use. It's all part of that effort of how does our resource use be sustainable on a planet with a growing economy and a growing population? And I could talk with you for hours about just those issues and how scary it is to me when you think about how are we really going to get humans who don't like change and are entrenched in comfort to challenge themselves enough to stop buying so much and stop using so much. I'm not sure how we're going to get there, but we have to get there. So we set this goal to be a zero waste campus. We did a waste audit to start that out to see where we were starting from. We learned a lot from that. I learned that we use a heck of a lot of paper towels, as does everybody, I think, who have public restrooms with paper towel dispensers. The good news on that is they are compostable. In my opinion, they're a lot better than a hand dryer, which uses energy, and a heat coil, which is a lot harder to support through clean energy. So we are trying to boost our compost piles so that we can help start to accommodate some of that organic matter that's currently in our landfill waste stream. We boosted our recycling program. Our biggest challenge, I think, is going to be our medical waste. And those sisters who need products, be it a syringe or other things, that it's just hard to find something that is reusable or biodegradable. And in some ways, one of the reasons we gave ourselves a 20-year window to get that emissions goal is because we're hoping technology and the marketplace will catch up to what we're trying to do. So my hope is that in 5 years, we'll have different options for some of these products and what's on the market. So we're working on it. This is something that happened before I came. The sisters put in on-demand hot water heaters, and that has been a huge energy saver in the buildings where they are. An on-demand hot water heater, it's also called a tankless water heater. So instead of having a 50 or 100-gallon tank where you keep hot water, you keep it full of hot water all the time, this does not work until someone turns on a tap and demands hot water. And then this is a gas unit. And so it runs, there's a flame, and the water is heated as it passes through those flames, and it's created on demand, and it uses a whole lot less energy. Probably like you all, we've been systematically replacing our lights with LED lights. We started externally because those exterior lights use up so much energy. And then we're spreading the message. It's evenings like this, or talking to groups to exchange information or inspire. That and being a model is probably the biggest role that we can play. It's been amazing, the ripple effects that something as simple as putting out a video or putting out a talk or having a conversation with a group. You all know that those ripple effects can be huge and can go further than any one of us realizes. So when the world hears, or when the United States leaders hear, well, there's a community of sisters in central Kentucky who have committed to clean energy and are doing A, B, C, and D, it makes others think, gosh, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And does anyone know what the number one, this is an interesting factoid, what the number one motivator is for people to have solar panels on their house? It's if their neighbors have solar panels. So we are inspiring one another. And this is just, I'm fascinated as a forester, I'm fascinated by mitochondria and what we're learning about underground connectivity in forests. And so this is, well, no, this is an illustration to kind of try to illustrate that connectivity that all of us have with one another and with the whole ecosystem. I've had a hard time not being a sister and not being Catholic, I've had a hard time getting my head around the term cosmology and the new cosmology. And I finally realized as an ecologist, it's just what I think about and learned as an ecologist, and how we are all connected in the universe. And it's part of that idea of connectivity that caused me to want to become an ecologist in the first place. And that idea that especially when you look beyond the human species and you look at the natural world and the millions of other species that we live with on this planet, and what effect we're having on them, and the fact that we are part of this planet. We talk about nature, well, we are nature. And so what we are doing to nature and the world around us we're doing it to ourselves, because we are part of it. So how do you support sustainability initiatives in a global community when you are in a community in 5 countries? And Susan talked, well, no, you didn't. You talked about the roundtable. This is the members of the advisory committee for ecological sustainability. And 2 of our sisters are in India, and so we Zoom with them. One of them is in Pittsburgh, and we're about to add another sister who's in Pittsburgh. So we try very hard to have that connection with our whole community, and it is challenging, as you can imagine, because of geography, but so worth it because we're learning from each other. When I saw the biogas that they're using in India and their compost piles, we talk a lot about making a compost pile and building it. And then I saw pictures of what our sisters in India are doing, and it's just a hole in the ground. They just dug a pit, and then they put the food scraps in it. That's why the dogs are getting into them. But when the pit's full, they just throw dirt on it and bury it, and then they dig a new pit. And if it's big enough, then they might siphon methane off of the compost piles too. This is all from an international development perspective. This is all what they call intermediate technology that is really terrific. It's just people getting it done. Pope Francis lent us a huge hand when he wrote Laudato Si, and it's been wonderful to have that as a resource and something to hold up in a Catholic community and say, this is, that Pope Francis supports this 100%, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful resource. And then I talked a little bit about presentations. This was one of those ripple effect examples that we did last year during the season of creation, where we supported the Salt River Electric. We're part of we get our electricity from Salt River Electric, and they started a solar farm where people can invest into that. And we wanted to support that. It's a really good model, especially for people who don't have the finances or the land to put solar panels on their property. And that was picked up by the Global Catholic Climate Movement. And I had a chance to meet the executive director of that global organization. And he said, oh yeah, I know about you all. You're the ones who who were supporting the solar farm in Kentucky and coal country. And I was able to say, yeah, that is us. So you never know the kind of effect.
So what we want to just share with you is we hired Carolyn about a year and a half ago. And what are some of the learnings that we have as we have inserted a director of ecological sustainability into the congregation and into the organization? I just want to, before we do that, just make a comment about the job description for Carolyn that we did. It has asked this person to not only work within the congregation, but also to be the face of the SCNs with other organizations. And so when Carolyn talked about being at the Salt River regional group, those are the kinds of places that we want her to be as well. And she has been out involved in those things and bringing that back to the congregation so that, again, we're not thinking only our thoughts, but we're seeing ourselves interconnected and as a part of bigger efforts that are going on. So as we, like I said, as we begin to think about what is the future of Nazareth, we're looking at that within a larger system that's there. So I just wanted to say that. The other thing that we have in her job description is that we want her to be a thought leader for the congregation. So part of what we expect in the role is that she has the time and the energy to be seeing what's going on out there and what kinds of things do we need to be thinking about that maybe we wouldn't have thought about. But because she's there and that's part of what she's meant to do for us, we will begin to pick up new ideas. And that's already happened with us and within us. And so we're just grateful. But to have someone whose role that is wonderful in a community. It's not just to be doing all the time, but also to be researching and paying attention to what's going on in the world around us that we need to pay attention to. So one of the things that we learned as we've been going through this year and a half is asking ourselves, how do you insert a new position like this that has effect for everything that we're doing? If we're going to be, as we said, scrutinizing our lifestyle throughout the international congregation, then how do you have a person who's your sustainability director connected to the groups that are doing things so that she can ask the questions or bring the ideas that maybe a committee wouldn't think about? I'll give you an example of that is when Carolyn came on board, she began to meet with the recycling committee. And she brought to them the concept that you're not just a recycling committee. You need to think of yourself as waste management. And so that's when we looked at how do we become a zero waste? Well, recycling is a part of that, but there are other things. It's like on the front end, Carolyn's working with the purchasing director. So how do you not have so many things? How do you begin to do that kind of thing? So that is a part of what we learned is how do we begin then to have Carolyn at the table and at the tables that she needs to be at. One of the things that we did is our organization is hugely complex because, I mean, just on the campus, it's complex because of the ministries that we have there and the sisters who live there and different buildings and doing different things. And so how could we help this person to navigate that complexity plus the internationality piece of it? Just on the campus, it's complex, but then, and so decision making in the SCN community is relatively, it is complex. So who makes the decisions? I'm sure that isn't true for the Lorettians. It's very straightforward and clear, I'm sure. But who makes the decisions? And so to help Carolyn navigate that complexity and confusion sometime, we had Sister Teresa Knabel, who was her mentor. And so Teresa has been involved in the community for years and has been a part of a lot of the decision-making around some of the sustainability things. And she knows all the players. And so she has been a mentor for Carolyn. Kind of walking with her, Carolyn meets with her. When Carolyn bumps up against a wall, it's like, what is this wall? And why is it here and how do we get over it or around it or, whatever. And so that I think was hugely helpful in bringing on board something and inserting a new position into an already complicated organization.
You mind if I jump in?
No, go ahead.
Things are going through my mind of what not to do. One of the things that I'm learning that sustainability directors everywhere, when I see trainings and professional development courses for sustainability directors, one of the most often taught skills is how do you talk to people about this? How do you talk to people about why change is important? And Susan has been really helpful with that too. The simple answer is you don't talk to them about the what. I am someone who I'm kind of geeky, I have an analytical mind, and I respond to data. So if you present research to me and peer review research and you say, okay, we need to do this because the temperatures are going up and here we can prove to you that it's from human sources, I would say, okay, let's go. Well, no, I learned most people don't think that way, or many people don't think that way. You have to start here, not here. And so talking to people about the why and the how before you talk about the what is so important. Find those common values. Find those shared values with them. If what's important here at Loretto is gardens and the outdoors or the woods, then you can approach so many of these topics we've talked about from that perspective and what the effects will have. So many of the bumps that I've encountered in the last year and a half have been, I think, where there's been a perception of not having shared values, or where I've been perceived as the sustainability police. That's a good thing not to do. Is I have been associated with projects and efforts that I knew nothing about, and yet I got all the credit or blame for something happening.
You never got the credit, you only got the blame.
So I think communication is always a challenge, but I've learned a lot too about treating the sisters who live on campus, understanding first that this is their home, just as this is your home, and you would proceed as you would going into anybody's home, with respect and as a guest. It's not just a place of work where anyone can come into any room and do what they please. And so that was another, of course, there's a story behind that, you can tell, I'm sure. Yes. So these are some of the bumps in the road. And also respecting the fact that change is hard, and some people just don't want to. Some people are at a point in their lives where they just really want to be comfortable. They want things the way they're used to. They want to be comfortable, and they kind of want to be left alone with that. And they've earned the right for that. And I understand that as much as a 48-year-old can, I think. So how do you work with them? Whether it's a new native plant landscaping or whether, sorry. Thank you. Or whether it's changing flooring material, or whether it's not having paper straws or disposable items plastic straws or disposable items in a dining room that people have become used to. Things that just humans would encounter.
But in spite of kind of the learnings, and every time something didn't work or we ran into conflict or whatever, we tried to step back and say, what did we learn? What did we learn from that about how we can continue to move this particular part of our mission statement forward? And I think we'll continue to be a learning organization in that sense. And in spite of the kinds of places where that didn't quite work, or that didn't work, we have been able to move forward the agenda and to move forward on the being zero emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And we keep trying to tie it back. That's what I keep saying to Carolyn. You need to keep tying it back to the mission and tie it back to that goal. How is this particular little thing getting us closer to the goal of being a zero waste campus or being zero greenhouse gas emissions? How is this helping us move in that direction? Some things are more obvious than others, but I think for a ecological sustainability director, as for any director, part of what you're about is meaning making. And so you have to help the group that you're working with make meaning of what is happening and what it is we're doing. Because you have the kind of privilege of seeing the whole in a way that sometimes people just, in their individual areas don't see it. And so you have to help see what is that whole and what is the meaning of this. And you can take that out bigger and bigger and bigger. What's the meaning of this for our zero waste? But what's the meaning for the zero gas emissions? How does that fit into our mission of care for the earth? And what does that do in terms of new cosmology and earth's spirituality? So those kinds of things. So anyway, it's been a great adventure, and I'm thrilled that Carolyn has been with us and stayed with us. And so thank you all so much. We're delighted to be here, and we look forward to conversation here now.
Does anyone have questions or ideas or comments they'd like to share?
I'm interested in so many of these facets and congratulate you. When we addressed this at the assembly this summer, sustainability, the first thing that hit me was, what are we going to do to cut down on our carbon footprint when we need so much gasoline for travel? We're forever going back and forth, this city to that city, for medical appointments or something that's needed, or simply to have a time out with people who haven't been here before and need to see the beauties we have in this state. That's important too. But we have a way of buying secondhand cars, and they're not always the lowest gas mileage cars. And some others, our best one has been without air conditioning for a while, and it's not good for taking people to the doctor. And so what do you do about your cars? How do you handle cars at Nazareth?
Well, I think the electric vehicle is going to help. It will cut those emissions if you talk about it from when the car is made and the resources that go into making that car to the end of its life. It's about half the emissions of a combustion engine vehicle. But the first time you get on an airplane, you've pretty much blown your carbon budget for the year. So I'm hoping that, I know that they are experimenting with electric airplanes and alternative fuels, but technology is going to have to help us along with some of that. Eventually, what would be great as we do become, as we bring in more renewable energy into the energy use that we're using, we hope to charge those electric vehicles with solar panels or some other way of generating renewable energy. That would be great. That would help with a lot of that gasoline. It doesn't eliminate the energy that went into making the car or mining the metal or, you know, the petroleum-based plastic that's in the car. But as some of you may be aware, companies are changing so fast, so fast. There are companies every day that are saying that they are committing to being 100% renewable energy, and they're doing it rapidly. So I'm very optimistic that we have bioplastics that are coming. They are here, and there are better ones that are coming for those car parts. The metal, I have no idea. But I think we're going to see some good solutions there.
I think in the community, we have a car committee, and they're responsible in the different areas for buying the cars, and they come together. And back, I would say 2003, we made a commitment to get more hybrid cars into our fleet. And I think that we've been fairly good at doing that, so that we have a number of hybrid cars when that was what you had available to you to cut down your carbon footprint. We have done that. And we also get some used cars. Most of our cars are Toyota, and we work with the Toyota of Louisville people. They know us well, and are working with Sister Teresa, is the one who usually buys the cars in the Louisville area. So now we've got hybrid cars in our fleet, and the car committee, Carolyn went and met with the car committee, and they made a decision that they would move toward the electric. And so now Teresa is starting to see how she can get more electric vehicles into the fleet. And, you know, there are different kinds of electric vehicles depending on how far you have to go and all of that sort of thing. So the car committee's done good research on that. We're also looking at hybrid electrics. The data shows that most people, probably wouldn't be true for you all, but most people, if you're going to do something, you're not going to go more than about 30 miles. You're in town, you're around, you're about. And so you can run on the electric charge for the most part until you can get back and charge it up again.
This is a plug-in hybrid.
A plug-in hybrid. So it runs on electric for the first 30 or so miles, and then it picks up into the gas. But for the most part, you can run. So those kinds of things we're starting to really look at, research, try to see. And then, like I said, Teresa's beginning to try to see how she can get more electric vehicles into the fleet. So.
It's Anthony. What my question is I don't want to belabor the car business too much, but what kind of an educational program do you provide for the sisters because of the different way of handling and driving an electric or
I have a hybrid, and it runs just like a regular car. But Carolyn will talk about how we've tried to educate and the sisters who would be using them. And that's a fear. That is a fear that sisters have, and they're hesitant to do it. But Sister Molly, that you saw her picture with that lovely red electric vehicle, Molly is, you know, she's not a mechanic and she's not a great, you know, car, but she loves it and she's learned. And for the most part, it runs pretty much like a regular car. How you start it, you know, I have a fob. I don't have a key anymore. I push a button and my car starts. That's way a lot of cars start now.
One thing that we did that was really helpful was we partnered with the organization Evolve, EV, capital E, capital V, Olve, Kentucky. They are a nonprofit that encourages electric vehicles in the state. And we did 2 ride and drives with them. One on our Louisville campus that was just for sisters, where sisters could get in. We had, I think, 6 or 7 electric vehicles there. And They could get in, they could ride around, they could drive them if they wanted. And they kind of realized what Susan said, they're really just cars. There might be a few different buttons, but at the end of the day, they're just cars. And then we did one at Nazareth that we opened up to the public. And so we had sisters and staff and the public there. And same thing, that was very helpful. Sister Molly we had the dealer come when they delivered the car, and the dealer spent time with Sister Molly to help her feel comfortable to use the car at first. But she's had very little problem with it and getting used to it.
I mean, that's the other thing.
When people have to, about 6 or 7 people or anybody goes out and uses it, is there a difference? I mean, does Molly use that car herself? You said that she was afraid somebody'd come along and want to take it. Now, if it's really good in mileage and all that, there'd be a lot of people around here who'd like to drive it. But what happens when you have multi-use of the car?
Sister Teresa intentionally has not purchased an electric vehicle to be used in those situations. However, one of the electric vehicles that is being purchased on this budget year is for those drivers in Louisville who take sisters to doctor's appointments and grocery stores, etc. And so it will be used for multiple trips, but really driven by, I think, 2 people who will be trained.
I think that the trick to that, or solution to that, Anthony, is that you train all of the people who will be using it. And it has a little bit different, I think it has a little bit different feel when you first start it, but that's all. And I mean, I know people who were afraid of hybrid cars, which drive just like a regular car. So it just is maybe a little scary, because when you come to a stoplight and then it sounds like it goes dead, you're like, but it's still fine as soon as you touch. So I think it's just a matter of getting somebody in to drive with them, to help people be comfortable with it. It just like the cars you've got now. I'm sure that people have to get a little used to the difference between this car or that car, where the buttons are and how you do the lights and all of that. But I think that would be the...
I have a question. I wonder if you could speak to what you are currently discerning in your care for Earth. You talked about a lot of the big decisions that you've made and some of the smaller ones. So, Anthony, what am I doing here? Now that you have made the decision to eliminate your carbon footprint by 2037 here, what are some of the other items on your list that you're figuring out?
Great question. At our last advisory committee meeting, I said, I think I'm ready for us to do a, now I'm totally blanking. What do you call it? Strategic plan. To provide some of that thought, to go through that discernment process and have a lot of input from many people, and also to have a roadmap, to have a better plan. One of the things that we are doing is working on our canopy, and specifically in the lawn. I don't know how many of you all have been to Nazareth, but part of it is forested, part of it is in cropland, and part of it looks like a park. And in the part that looks like a park, we're re-examining our mowing regimes. We're pulling back on mowing. That's the easiest thing you can do to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce the amount of time that staff spends on mowers. She got it. And it's also a great way, it's actually a win-win, because you're no longer emitting the greenhouse gas emissions that you need to mow, and you're sequestering more carbon by allowing the plants to grow that you're no longer mowing. So we've been re-examining those no-mow areas, and we've been doing a lot of tree planting. The bad part, or the sad part of that is, last year we lost, I think, 43 trees from emerald ash borer, from just maturity, and from poor planting 15 and 20 years ago, girdled trees that are having a girdled root problem and are finally dying, disease. We're seeing, because of these wet springs we've been having and wet summers, we are seeing more fungus and some bacterial scorch. So we are not, unfortunately, at a net gain. We're currently experiencing, from last year to this year, we're experiencing a net loss. And part of that is, could we pay to buy more trees? Yes, we can pay to buy more trees, but someone has to plant them and someone has to maintain them. And if you aren't committing the labor resources to plant and maintain those trees for at least a couple years to get them started, you're really just throwing money out the window. So we're planting what our staff can handle, and we've inventoried how many ash trees we have and trying to predict what our losses will be. We've started treating some of the ashes that are in more prominent areas and that weren't too far gone. And who knows, maybe the emerald ash borer will finally run out of food and it'll have a population dip and we can have our ashes again. Something else that I wanted to mention that I'm really excited about and that we have reached out to you all about is purchasing. When I talked to the director of Partnership for a Green City, which is in Louisville, it is the University of Louisville, Louisville City Government, Jefferson County Public Schools, and Jefferson County Technical and Community College. Those 4 huge entities partner on sustainability efforts. And when I asked that director, what's worked? What's made a difference? The first thing he said was purchasing. We combined our purchasing efforts on major products. So now what they did was they elevated the standard, the sustainability standards for everybody's paper, for their toilet paper, for their cleaning supplies. So that's uniform across those 4 entities. And it's high, it's as high as they can get. So that means their paper has a certain percentage of post-consumer recycled waste, and their cleaning supplies aren't toxic. And then they bid that out as a group and got a lower price. So they order and have that delivered individually or independently of each other. But the contract that they negotiated was combined. And when I heard that, I thought, well, we could do that. What if we worked with the Laurentines and the Dominicans and anyone else who wants to work with us on, if nothing else, having the conversation and talking about what those standards might be for certain products. And then if we feel like it makes sense to try to bid that out together to get a lower price, we could do that too. So that's something that we're working on right now. I think, I'll just say one other thing and then I think the challenges for my position is not to get too caught up in the minutia. It's very easy for me to kind of get head down in this one little thing, and usually it has to do with grounds, because that's sort of my comfort area and my strength, or trees. And I could spend half my time just on the trees on campus. Well, that's great. And I think trees are pretty much the best thing you can do for the environment is plant a tree. However, there are a lot of important things that go across the community that I think my time is worth spending on.
One of the things that we talked about in the Ecological Sustainability Advisory Committee is how do we bring this into the total organization. And so we talked together about revising the budgeting system and helping the different budget areas to look at how do they live out sustainability, and to pull that out in their budget and say, we are asking for this coming year because it will help us with this sustainability effort. The other thing that we want to do is, we did a presentation for the campus service people. That's the grounds people, the maintenance people, the housekeeping, those people. We shared with them a little bit of what we shared here, the why. Where did the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth begin? Why are we doing this? We shared that with them, and then we shared a little bit about, what we're doing, and thanked them because much of it is they're involved in it, and talked to them about the role of the sustainability director. And so we decided at the last Ecological Advisory Committee that we would take that presentation and do it for everybody on campus, so that all of our directors, our advisory committees, our investment advisory, our finance committee, everybody would have the big picture of where it is the community wants to be and what we want to be doing. Because those people, the finance committee people, for example, for them to look at something and go, oh, wow, that's way too expensive. Well, you know what? We're risking our resources here. We're going to spend that money this year because we believe that it's going to help us towards zero waste or zero gas emissions, whatever, greenhouse gas. So to try to help the whole system to understand the why and the what and how we'll get to that is another thing that we're doing.
I know that Barbara Nicholas has a question on Zoom. So Barbara, if you will unmute yourself and shout it out.
Shout it out.
Hey,
Susan and Carolyn, hello. Thank you. I've learned so much. Just to come in on one little piece of your program, I would like you, if you could share a little bit more about the carbon exchanges that you paid attention to in terms of travel. As you know, we don't do the international piece as much as you do, but we do a lot around cross country. And so I guess I'm thinking, are there, guide us on like where to look to see some real possibilities about those carbon exchanges. You mentioned planting more trees and consulting with others, but if you could expand that a little bit, it'd be helpful. And thanks a bunch for the whole program.
You're welcome. So what we did was relatively simple, is there are places on the web that you can go in and you can find out how much carbon, what's my carbon footprint for this particular thing. And so I would have my assistant do that. We go, okay, there are 6 of us going to India for this meeting. We're going to go and come. She'd figure out mileage or however they figured that. And then it would be equivalent in that to a certain amount of money. And then we would take that amount of money and we would either partner with another organization. We didn't go to one of those carbon offset organizations. We really tried to look a little more close to home. We did one time, we gave money to each of the countries and said, this is an amount of money. Can you use it in your country to plant trees there? We've partnered with Brightside in Louisville, which works in the tree canopy in Louisville, things like that. We just looked around. Another time, Anita, my assistant, was very creative about kind of looking out there. And another time we did something, it was in Alabama or Louisiana, where they were working on trying to do wetlands, for example. So just things like that, you can look around and see. And Carolyn probably knows other places and ways to do it, but that's how we did it.
Well, I think this is a great example of how there are so many different ways to accomplish what you're trying to do. And I think what you all did was fabulous. There are a lot of online carbon trader sort of sites where you can figure out what those carbon emissions are. And then the trick is you want to try to invest in new renewable energy. And there's some good third-party certifiers out there who help make sure these companies are doing what they say they're doing. But if you invest in a solar farm that's been around for 10 years, that's fine, but you're not really creating new renewable energy. So investing in something that creates new renewable energy is building that market for everybody.
We have just a few more minutes before supper. I know Alicia has a question.
I'm just wondering, it's a wonderful program. If you have done anything with food production, I know it's really labor intensive, and it's just maybe.
She said not worth the energy and time. Great question. The answer is we're trying. So we've had a community garden for years, and primarily sisters and people who live on campus have used that community garden. And as fewer and fewer sisters are able to use it, we have found that we have more and more land available. So this was the first year that we did, at least the first year in a long while, that we did a kitchen garden. And I would call it mildly successful. There was a fellow who had a little bit of gardening experience, but not that much, and he was already on staff. And so he was told to dedicate a certain number of hours a week to that, but really he got pulled away as the rain kept falling and the grass kept growing. And, the tomatoes would fall and the okra was this long. And so, and it really wasn't enough space to produce enough produce to do much with. So we just met last week and decided that we're going to take over more of the garden. A position was posted for a part-time gardener, part-time grounds, part-time gardener, and they're looking at people who have a lot of experience. And hopefully that person will be planting probably fewer number of crops and more quantity of those crops, so that we can take something to the kitchen and have people really feel like, oh, this came, this whatever was supported by our garden. I think it's challenging. And one of the things that that I'm gonna suggest, we're gonna talk about at my advisory committee next week, is doing a plant-based meal. We do meatless Fridays by nature of eating fish, but unfortunately, all meat, dairy, eggs have a huge carbon footprint. And so as part of the season of creation, and I'm in a course called Living the Change that Jessie is also in, the idea that I'm going to suggest for us to toss around is having a day of solidarity with those people who are most affected by climate change by just having plant-based food that day. In other words, vegan. And see how that goes, and see if it's an experiment that worked well enough to incorporate more into our diet. And if we do this, nothing's been approved. Don't tell anybody in Nazareth that we had this conversation, please. But if this idea is approved, then we would invite sisters throughout the community to do the same thing. So they would be doing that in India and Belize, et cetera, on the same day.
We might have time for just one more question. If anybody has a burning question, you have to get out of your system.
Or idea.
Or idea. Beth has a question. Great. Hold on one second. Beth, go ahead and shout.
Great. Thanks so much. I appreciate the presentation. I appreciate being able to zoom in. Thank you so much, Carolyn. I'm talking to you from the Cleveland area today. It's great to see you again.
It's
Thanks
good
to you
too.
Susan, for all you're doing. I am totally excited to email Teresa Cotteran from your community, who's the UN rep in New York, to see if we could bring you or one of you out to the United Nations sometime soon. I don't know about 2019 because I don't know if I'll still be around because we'll have new leadership, but I hope so because I think the world needs to hear about what's happening in Kentucky for sure. And I just wanted to thank you and to ask you to be in touch with me through Jesse if you would like to be coming to the UN. And while you were talking, I made my first eco brick. I don't know if y'all have heard about eco bricks yet, but it's a way to deal with our plastic waste, because at least in New York, there are all these things going around about how the plastic doesn't really get recycled and it ends up in the oceans, which is incredibly heart-wrenching and disappointing for me. But I discovered while doing research for something else, of course, online, that there are these things called eco bricks, and they're really popular in Central America and the Philippines. And you just take your plastic waste and you take a plastic bottle and you fill it up with your plastic waste, and then you can build things with them, from furniture to walls for gardens, for raised beds, to all kinds of other interesting stuff. So thank you so much. And it was a wonderful meditation for me to make an eco brick while listening to the two of you do your presentation. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And that's a great example of how, you know, if there's one thing humans are good at, it is being creative and innovative. And when I get down, I read a lot of really depressing data, unfortunately. And when I get low, I get my inspiration from seeing those kind of creative solutions that people are doing out there. And I find a lot of hope in our youngest generation. 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds. I don't know if you all are aware, but the campaign to stop using plastic straws was started by a 9-year-old. And good for him. So yeah, I think that is where a lot of our hope lies, young people and innovation.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. I took really good notes the first time you gave this presentation. So Susan, I'm going to quote you. What you said the first time you gave this in Cincinnati. You said, when we articulate something, we begin moving in that direction, either consciously or unconsciously. So thank you so much.